Hello and welcome. I'm Barkha Dutt. You're with the Mojo Story, our independent digital platform that does a deep dive into the biggest issues of our time. Something that deserves much more attention than it's getting is what's happening in Afghanistan. We now know that the Americans will complete their military mission of troop withdrawal by the 31st of August, bringing an abrupt end to a 20-year war that many are seeing as the absolute abandonment of Afghanistan by the Americans. The question is where this leaves the region. Very clearly, the Taliban is on the rise once again. The Taliban now claiming strategic control of several key districts. The Taliban could be back in domination in Afghanistan. And the foreign minister, Jaishankar, is warning that that has implications for all of the world. What should India be doing in Afghanistan? How does this change the geopolitical equations? What does this do to the India-Pakistan factor at a time when it is widely believed, as it has been for many years, and the Pentagon has made references to this, that there are Taliban safe havens inside Pakistan. Let's introduce our panel of experts on the program today, one by one. Let me introduce first Dr. Shalini Chawla, who's with the Centre for Air Power Studies. Welcome to the program, ma'am. General Hasnain, who's a strategic affairs analyst. He's been the General Officer Commanding of the 15 Corps, is with us. Ambassador Vivek Katju, who knows Afghanistan and Pakistan, and I would say it's kind of important to know both countries at this point, is also with us. Can we slow down on the introductions? We're also joined by Happymon Jacob, well-known strategic affairs expert, author of several books. Welcome. And welcoming Mosharraf Zaidi, our friend from Pakistan, a well-known journalist and columnist. Welcome to the program, Mosharraf. I would like to start with you, Ambassador Katju. It's clear that the Taliban is on the rise again. It could be the return of the Taliban, and nothing perhaps demonstrates that more than the fact that as fighting breaks out near Kandahar, in and around the region of Kandahar, India has had to withdraw home staff from the consulate there, even though local staff continues to man the consulate. What is actually going on here? What's your own sense? The Americans are quite literally walking out as abruptly as they walked in. And now it is this region that could erupt again, our region.
Well, I think it's a very delicate moment in Afghanistan. The Americans had a plan which relied on three steps: the formation of an interim government, which would include the Taliban and the Kabul elite, followed by a ceasefire, and then talks between different Afghan leaders about a future dispensation. Quite clearly, the announcement by President Biden that the Americans would withdraw on September 11th gave the Taliban a clear incentive to embark on military operations with renewed vigor. And they've done so. And over the last couple of months, they have acquired greater momentum. And it's surprising to many observers that they are gaining ground in northeastern Afghanistan and western Afghanistan and parts of northern Afghanistan, which are not their traditional areas. They are, of course, strong in the Pashtun heartlands in the south and the east, especially the areas abutting the Durand line. Now, so we've got to really see whether the Taliban are trying to acquire at this stage a position of strength and will ultimately talk to the Kabul people, or whether they are decided to go for an all-out victory. Now, whatever may be, my last sentence, Barkha, that whatever may be the case, we now have to anticipate clearly that the Taliban will be a most significant factor in Afghan affairs, if not the factor that controls Afghan affairs. The question is whether the Taliban have evolved sufficiently to justify the legitimacy that the international community has bestowed upon them. And my very last point there is a report which I saw this today in the CNN, and the CNN has now claimed that that report is
Video.
verified, where
Yeah.
video verified, where they show that 22 Afghan commandos who had surrendered came out without arms and they were slaughtered on the street. If that is the case, then of course it's a matter of great worry.
Right. And in fact, we have that video, and you are seeing images of that video play out right there. This was an extremely disturbing video. It's been shared by a Twitter user. And that was the video that Ambassador Katju was making a reference to. We've had to actually blur out many of the visuals, so they were simply too graphic to actually meet the guidelines of broadcasting dissemination. But what you're talking about is unfolding in a chilling manner in that video there. My very brief question to you, and then I'll open it up for the rest of the panel, Ambassador Katju, is this. India's engagement with the Taliban. Now, two things have happened. We've had a high-ranking official from Qatar make the claim that Indian diplomats have been quietly, this is the word he used, quietly engaging with the Taliban in Doha. And we have the 2018 reference where two of our retired senior diplomats, TCA Raghavan and Amar Sinha, attended talks at a table where the Taliban was also present. If you believe that it's only a matter of time where the Taliban becomes a dominating force in government in Afghanistan, does India have any choice but to engage with the Taliban?
Barkha, I've argued in my writings and in my appearances in various TV shows since February of 2017 that India should open contacts with the Taliban, and that these contacts, and then I started arguing that these contacts should be open. Because as I saw that the world was bestowing legitimacy on the Taliban, I thought to myself that India should not deny itself the opportunity to talk to the Taliban. And I know for a fact that the Taliban, in their meetings with Indians, I'm not saying Indian officials, Indians, were wanting a message to be passed to Delhi that they should not be considered as Pakistani puppets. And they used to ask, when have they made any strident remarks about matters of sensitivity to India? So I, for one, believe, and I hold this, that diplomacy demands that you talk to everyone. Now, that doesn't mean that you endorse them. And that also doesn't mean that you reduce or diminish the strategic partnership that you have with the Afghan authorities. There is an agreement. India is the first country to join this agreement. And in that context, if you permit me to say, I found the young NSA of Pakistan's comments about India's contacts, if these reports are true, I have no way of verifying them, what the Qatari gentleman has said and what you've said about two of my former colleagues, if they're true. I found Mueed Yusuf's comments to be laughable, because he says India has no shame and is talking to them. What is this? After all, is this how strategic affairs are conducted? The Americans have lost 2,500 men and women. They've been engaged in war. So should they have had shame in talking to the Taliban? Or should the Taliban have had shame in talking to the Americans? I was absolutely astonished that a national security advisor, I could understand if Sheikh Rashid, the interior minister, was making such comments. But for Mueed Yusuf to say this was truly astonishing.
Okay,
in fact,
so many,
if anything, you should welcome that India is talking to the Taliban.
Okay, but many different dimensions, Ambassador Katju, for someone who's often been called a hawk, for you to say that India must talk to whoever comes to power in Afghanistan, to all stakeholders, including the Taliban, is interesting, because General Hasnain, does that upend years of our saying there is no good Taliban and bad Taliban? Does it upend years of our belief, with very good reason, that there is Pakistani patronage for the Afghan Taliban? Something that the Pentagon has in fact made reference to in comments just in the last few days, where the Pentagon says it is in constant communication with Pakistan to shut down safe havens along and inside the border in Pakistan. So when we say, or if we are to begin engaging with the Taliban, it seems to be the case, Does it upend years of our stated position, or is that what actually agile diplomacy and strategic affairs is all about? General Hasnain, can we unmute him, please? Can we come out and go to General Hasnain, please?
Yeah, so sorry, I'm muted.
Yes.
Barkha, all these years we really had very few options. The Taliban was always painted in India as something extremely evil. Those who had a greater knowledge of it, greater contact with Afghanistan, etc., may have had different opinions, etc. But most of us always painted the picture that the Taliban is the most evil factor in Afghanistan. As a result of that, we were always putting all our eggs into the basket as far as the government of national unity is concerned. So, with that and with the American presence there, which we were never expecting is going to just move out overnight like this and leave everything in anarchy, perhaps we were always under the impression that some kind of an arrangement will emerge ultimately in Afghanistan. People like Ambassador Katju always had a better sense of understanding of Afghanistan. He was the one who was always recommending the aspect which he spoke about speaking to the Taliban. But generally, most of us in India were not of this opinion at particular times. I am over the last 1 year, 1.5 years, probably completely changed my mind. And I said, yes, without the Taliban, you cannot achieve anything. Perhaps one military.
What changed your mind? What changed your mind?
You see, what really changed my mind is over the last 3 years, particularly after I started viewing and witnessing the kind of casualties that the Afghan national security forces were suffering, approximately 8,000 killed per year on an average. I realized that with any amount of ammunition, equipment, training, whatever, even what India was doing, it was not possible for the Afghan national forces to hold on and defeat the Taliban. And therefore, at some stage, it was necessary for us to make some line of speaking to the Taliban. We really didn't know how to do it. We didn't know how to actually, circumvent our involvement with the United States. We always felt the United States' presence in Afghanistan was something which was of great advantage to us, the western flank of Pakistan, which was kept stable at the other end. And therefore, we were happy with this, to take the difficult decisions of now suddenly coming across to the Taliban and possibly losing some friends in Kabul was, I think, something which was always troubling us.
Yes, and why should it not trouble us now? I mean, India's historic equation with the Northern Alliance, with Ahmad Shah Massoud, with Karzai. I mean, there are investments that India has clearly made. India chose a side in this equation, whether it was smart or not, right? If we are to change this, if we are to actually change it, if I can bring in Shalini now, does it have implications which will go further in specific with Pakistan?
Yeah, see, just one comment on Taliban's positioning and how what is happening right now to my mind was not completely surprising, because after the signing of the agreement, we would see that rigidness in the Taliban in terms of flexing their own muscles and not kind of compromising on any of their conditionalities. So one could sense that they will kind of proceed with the way they want, and what's happening is very much in, I think, sync with what we were seeing after the signing of the agreement. Now your question is that if we have to carry on our role and engagement in Afghanistan and the implication it will have on Pakistan, I think our engagement in Afghanistan depends on three factors. One is obviously our own decision and how we want to kind of communicate with the different stakeholders, which includes Taliban, which General Hasnain and Ambassador Katju said that we must go ahead and talk, which even I agree. A second factor is obviously what Taliban's position is going to be, which has influence of Pakistan on that. So we have a statement from Taliban which said that we would want peaceful coexistence with India, but in the same statement, the first sentence said that we share values and history with Pakistan. And then Pakistan's statement, one was Muhammad Yusuf, and then we also had the foreign minister saying that India's engagement is more than it ought to be. So one of Pakistan's prime drivers and one of the main strategic objectives of kind of treating Afghanistan as a proxy state, if I may say, or its strategic depth, one of the main objective was to kind of deny India's engagement as much as possible. So definitely I see that resistance is going to grow from Pakistan's side, and that's not going well with them. And the second power which is going to be very I think very active, and it will play a significant role in Afghanistan, is China, which is Pakistan's. So we have two big powers who share the same objective of countering our engagement there. So we do have significant challenges there, and this will be an added, strain of tension in the India-Pakistan relations.
And in fact, there's Mosharraf back with that. I was just wondering where we lost him. I'd really like to get a perspective on what's going on in Pakistan. Not that Mosharraf speaks for the Pakistani government or the Pakistani state, but it will give us some sense, and we'll come to him in just a moment. Happymon, are you on board with everybody else here? This is pretty astounding. Pretty much all of our three sort of experts have said that India must engage with the Taliban.
In fact, I would go on to say that our half-hearted, half-embarrassed, indirect approach to talking to the Taliban is hardly sufficient to safeguard Indian interests there. Right? If I'm not mistaken, Ambassador Katju used the word open talks, and I completely agree with him for a variety of reasons. And I do understand why the government of India probably wants to sort of take it slow, because to begin with, it does not want to make Ashraf Ghani unhappy and uneasy about it. And then clearly, the Taliban is not yet a monolith today, and therefore we don't know really who to talk to in Taliban. And I think that's also one of the reasons why we saw the surrendering Afghan soldiers being slaughtered by the Taliban. You have the Quetta Shura, you have the political leadership in Doha, and then you have the guys fighting on the ground. So that you're looking at a a number of actors in Afghanistan, and yet I would say the hesitation that there is in New Delhi about we don't know the real intentions of the Taliban, who to talk to in Taliban. I think it's time that we overcome those hesitations, and I think Ambassador Katju from 2017 has been making this very strong argument. At that point of time, there were no takers for that. I think I'm happy that today we have a lot of people engaging with that argument. It is making peace with the fait accompli in Afghanistan is not a bad thing.
So basically, before I come to Mosharraf, it's saying we have no choice. You have to do business with whoever's there.
One, we have no choice, and two, we have a real opportunity. If we are not proactive about Afghanistan now, about the Taliban now, Russia, Iran, Pakistan, and China will emerge as the shapers of Afghanistan's geopolitical destiny. And why shouldn't India be part of that? So it's not just a question of hey, this is the fait accompli, therefore accepted. It's also an opportunity for India. In many ways, therefore, opening the this is an opportunity for India to open the congested northwestern frontier, as it were. In some ways, look at the LOC, the LAC, Kashmir, and Afghanistan. If you don't engage in talks with this, with various factions and various actors, I think we are going to be sort of boxed in continentally in this space. I think that is not something that we should be looking at as a great thing.
Okay, so this is pretty interesting, Mosharraf. All of our four very eminent Indian experts believe that India should talk to the Taliban. Qatar, or an official from Qatar has said that is already happening. That process is already underway. What does this do? What does this do to Pakistan's official denial for many years that it patronizes the Afghan Taliban? Suddenly, the Afghan Taliban is not something that has to be disowned. Countries are going to be engaging with it, not underground but overground. How does this play out in Pakistan, Mosharraf? Mosharraf, we still have a bad line to you. We're going to let you fix that, and I'll get Ambassador Katju. I know you were wanting to make a point. Now let me actually argue from the other side. I'm actually pretty surprised to hear all of you say that we must engage with the Taliban. I understand that you have to engage with whoever's a dominating force, but on what grounds do we continue to then say, hey, Pakistan is providing this safe haven? Basically, then we are competing with Pakistan for leverage with the Taliban, Ambassador Katju?
No, of course not, Barkha. Diplomacy
I mean,
never.
I'm obviously overstating it, but I want
No,
to provoke you a little bit into
no, you can
understanding
prove.
why the Taliban is suddenly seen as a legitimate stakeholder. It is upending years of our stated policy.
Because that's the ground situation. And that is the situation that I saw in 2017. That is what is emerging. And diplomacy and strategic matters, and I'm sure my eminent co-panelists will agree, is all about anticipation. The Taliban, I've had some personal experience, official experience of dealing with Afghanistan at a time when the Taliban were ruling, and they were ruling in a most abominable manner, and they didn't have international legitimacy. But by 2017, it was quite clear that despite the theatrics of President Trump, and he was going nowhere, despite all his chest thumping, for some time I think the Pakistanis were worried, were deeply concerned about the direction Trump may go. But by the spring of 2018, they realized that this was nothing; it was all hot air. So what I had seen in 2017 was obvious on the ground in 2018. And diplomacy does not mean that if you start talking to the Taliban, you are angering the Kabul establishment. After all, the Kabul establishment was eagerly wanting to talk to the Taliban. The Americans were talking to them, the Chinese, the Russians. The situation, what was the situation in the 1990s? The three significant powers that were ranged against the Taliban were India, Iran, and Russia. Everyone knows this.
So what do we say to what do we say to Pakistan while we're reaching out to the Taliban? What are we saying to Pakistan? What are we saying to Pakistan?
What we are saying to Pakistan, what we will say to Pakistan is that anyone in authority in Afghanistan will be an independent actor. He will decide policy not at your behest, but
Okay, I think Ambassador Katju is frozen as well. Shalini, do you want to just jump in to actually expand on the point you were making about the countervailing force that could emerge, or the axis, the Pakistan-China axis, that in fact could get stronger? It's even been suggested in some commentary that this could be like a counter quad, almost like a counter quad that could emerge, because America is now clearly on the other side of the divide. We are seen as allies of the US, though we do not self-identify, of course, as that. But there is that apprehension now of a counter quad, or at least a countervailing of forces, and then pushing through, the One Belt, One Road initiative by China.
So I think our engagement in Afghanistan, three factors why we have to engage, and since Taliban is going to be a significant stakeholder, there's no doubt. So our engagement, that point, we said it. So 3 points, like if we have to deal and counter the instability coming from Afghanistan, with the rise of the extremist forces there, especially the logistical and the ideological support with the anti-India organization have been getting from there. If we have to kind of counter that, we have to be engaged. If we have to counter the Pakistan-China alliance, which we will see an expanded version, is my assessment, in Afghanistan, because China very seriously, I think, is looking at Afghanistan as a regional connector. So it has only offered Afghanistan to be a part of, CPEC, Iran also, and it's already engaged in Central Asia. So the presence of both these actors will definitely have not only implications of our engagement in Afghanistan, but an overall, implication on the posturing of Pakistan as well. So we might not feel the impact of that alliance suddenly in Afghanistan, but you will see down the road, 1 year, 2 year down the road, you will see that impact in the other parts of India, and I think Kashmir also, which General Hasnain might like to comment. But, our engagement, and I think thirdly and most importantly, our commitment for Afghanistan, which is there for the developmental assistance, and especially which have been a policy to have people, people to people contact, and investment in the in the human skills there. That if we want that to continue, our engagement has to be there. And if that engagement comes at the cost of engaging with the Taliban, I think we need to explore the ways to do that.
Okay, General Hasnain, this is an interesting question. There are two dimensions to this. One is our strategic interest as a country in Afghanistan. The second is the consequence for what it means in the Kashmir Valley. I remember when I started to report from Jammu and Kashmir, graveyards used to have fighters as they were called, terrorists for us, who had come in from Afghanistan, who had come in from Sudan even. And that kind of, sort of Islamist notion of the Kashmiri terrorist from outside had actually diminished. You had basically Pakistani terrorists and local militancy. Are you concerned about the consequences domestically for the Kashmir Valley? One. And two, what happens to the safe havens argument that the world has long put pressure on Pakistan when it comes to the Afghan Taliban if we are simultaneously sitting across a table and dialoguing with them? Sir, you're on mute.
Regarding Afghanistan, directly on Jammu and Kashmir. And I tend to normally brush it off by saying it's not 1989, it's not 1990. We are 30 years beyond. You see, the 80s, you had this whole issue of the Islamic jihadists who went into Afghanistan. They suddenly became, unemployed after the end of the Cold War and the defeat of the Soviets, etc. And the ISI, which was there, which was leading the whole show at that time in Afghanistan, obviously had a plan already kept in mind, and they just swung the hordes of them towards Jammu and Kashmir. This is not likely to happen now, because I foresee that with the kind of situation at the moment in Afghanistan, it's going to be a long drawn-out affair for some time. I don't expect a complete walkover over the Afghan National Army and the Afghan National Security Forces. And therefore, to think that Afghan fighters are suddenly overnight going to be available to Pakistan to do what it wants to Jammu and Kashmir, this is, I think, a little overdone, if nothing else. Besides that, look at our own security setup and our own experience in handling this. It's completely different. You never had the Rashtriya Rifles, you never had a counter-infiltration grid and things like that. And today, with Article 370, etc., having been done away with, our control over the situation is far, far greater. So I don't expect anything. But to add one more point to the diplomatic aspect, interestingly, you're finding talks going on in Tehran between the Taliban and the Iranians, and even of course, the Ashraf Ghani government itself also being represented there. Obviously, in this whole muddle, Iran is emerging as a very important player. It's always been. I think we need to invest much more in the Iran-Russia route rather than anything else, because we have a long-standing friendship with Russia. Our interests are almost similar as far as Central Asia is concerned, and with Iran too. So I think that is the axis on which India should be playing much more at the moment.
Happymon, you said that the half-embarrassed defensive posturing with the Taliban is not needed. So are you saying that India, instead of back-channeling with the Taliban, should basically own up and aggressively, openly, publicly be dialoguing with the Taliban while this long game, the great game was the phrase first coined for the sort of for Afghanistan, different countries trying to take control and all failing one by one. Do you believe that India should openly be dialoguing in full public gaze with the Taliban?
I think so. I think there is no point in letting the Pakistani deep state deal with the Taliban. If India does not reach out to the Taliban, who are we letting the Taliban to deal with? We are letting the Pakistani deep state to deal with the Taliban. I think that's an inherently bad idea. Even though the Taliban is considered to be propped up by the Pakistanis, I don't think when the Taliban actually comes to power, they are going to be beholden to the Pakistanis beyond the point. And thirdly, the point that Atta made about the Kashmir connection, I think that's an interesting point. If India does not reach out to the Taliban openly and have a dialogue with the Taliban, the encouragement that the Kashmiri youngsters will get from the rise of Taliban in Afghanistan is that if the Taliban can defeat the mighty United States of America, what is the Indian, we can probably take on the Indian army. So there is going to be that angle. But there is a flip side to the Kashmir angle. Let me put it that way. If the Indian state reaches out to the Taliban and is engaged in a dialogue with the Taliban, the question is, why can't it then be in a dialogue with the dissidents in Kashmir, or even some of the militant leaders in Kashmir / terrorist leaders in Kashmir? So I think it has implications of
that's what Mehbooba Mufti had said. If you can talk to the Taliban, why won't you talk to Pakistan? That's how she started, right? Not so much about the internal dimension, but that was her point. But actually, that's a facile argument, frankly, because the point is that statecraft is quite different from what countries do to Happymon assert their own national security. It's a facetious argument, isn't it? Happymon, are you there? Yeah.
Right. I see that point, but a country like India will also at some point of time look for ways of morally justifying engagement with the Taliban, right? It is not as if we are a country with a certain kind of moral talk, whether we like it or not. So we will sort of foreground that. So the moment you foreground the moral logic of talking to the Taliban, there will be counter questions asked. I'm not saying.
I don't think so. We talk to the Saudis, we talk to the Chinese. They're not democracies. We are a democracy. There are countries that don't have our values on the equality of men and women. We talk to them. I think statecraft is quite different from what we need to do within our country. I can see General Saab agreeing with me, but while I still have Mosharraf, because we literally lose him every few seconds. Mosharraf, I'm just going to let you just jump in with your comments before we lose you again. Mosharraf, go ahead.
Well, thanks for including me in this really interesting conversation, Barkha. I think it's nice to hear the views from friends in India, the open-mindedness of friends in India to talking to the Taliban. I think is welcome. Just like in Pakistan, it's good to see that there's also a big debate in India about this issue. For the last several weeks, as you would have been following, there's been a lot of reflection about Pakistan's engagement with Afghanistan, the role of the Taliban in Afghanistan, and obviously Pakistan's engagement with the Taliban itself. I heard, obviously, as in with every conversation with friends across the border, I heard many things that I am supposed to object to and raise vociferous objection to, but I think for the most part, given how difficult it's been to connect today, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I think the differences between the Indian and the Pakistani perspective are quite well known, and maybe in the interest, and I was going to say in the interest of getting something from Mosharraf, while he's still there and he vanished on cue, but hopefully he'll come back. I need to actually start taking closing comments, but I find the debate that raised by Happymon's comments quite interesting. Ambassador Katju, his point is that once you accept the sort of pragmatism and therefore the moral compromise in talking to the Taliban, questions will arise about why you won't talk to Islamabad, why you don't talk to insurgents and militant groups who are your own people. When I say own people, I mean Indians in Kashmir, and so on. Kind of what Mehbooba Mufti said. I was disagreeing with him, but I'm wondering how you would react to it, Ambassador Katju.
No, I don't see any moral ambiguity here. The Taliban have been involved in a few attacks at the behest of the Pakistanis against our diplomatic establishments. At least a part of the Taliban. It's believed that the Haqqanis were involved, but there is no evidence that the Quetta boys were involved. But apart from that, it's unlike Pakistan, which has for the last 3 decades gone on a policy, a systematic policy of fomenting terror. The Taliban have not done that. I'm not condoning what they've been, what sections of them have done, and we need justice for our people who died and who suffered. But diplomacy, Barkha, is not conducted in the manner that you apply moral standards. Diplomacy is harsh, realistic business.
No, he's supporting talking to the Taliban, but he's saying the question will arise about why that template is not applied, therefore, to the others that you're not talking to.
No, but that is
exactly
what I'm saying, that can't be applied to the Pakistanis because they want to use terror to force you to talk. They put a pistol at your head and say, now you will talk. When it comes to the Taliban, no, my last point, when it comes to the Taliban, we've got to accept the international reality that they've become legitimate. Now, Jaishankar is all very well for Jaishankar to say that there should be an element of
questions about
legitimacy. Legitimacy about, yes, of course, everyone has legitimized them. The Americans have entered into a deal with them on the basis of which they are withdrawing. And the Americans are the principal. They went in, they've suffered 2,500 almost dead. NATO soldiers have died. See, this is the way the structure works. Evil. Yes, of course, the Taliban are evil in many of their theological positions. They are not of this century. But that old saying I always remember, sup with the devil but have a long spoon.
Right. And there are two other sayings, General Hasnain, relevant to this conversation. The Taliban like to say, you have the watch, but we have time. And the other more pedestrian saying is, not my monkey, not my circus. So the difference, I think, is that while the Taliban are completely bestial almost, for example, in their perceptions of women, and certainly that video we saw where even breaking all codes of war, where those Afghan troops are being attacked, all of this is savage behavior. But I think what Ambassador Katju is arguing is that it's not our problem. Our problem may lie, in fact, in allowing Pakistan the singular space to be their patrons. So you're on mute. Now you're back. Yeah.
The whole issue is of legitimacy, as he's brought it out very, very clearly. And also the fact that what the Taliban is going to be ultimately in the future as far as being in government is concerned, we really cannot say. Legitimacy may contribute something else, a lot of change in attitude, etc. I know it's going to be Islamist, generally Islamist in angle, but you're seeing what's happening to Saudi Arabia. It is changing. Saudi Arabia was one of the countries which recognized the Taliban in 1996. So did the UAE. Both the countries have changed completely. So it's not as if everything is going to be fixated. You must remember that Taliban has to still run this country. Where is the money going to come from? It's going to be a consortium of nations which will have to put together some money to allow the Taliban to run Afghanistan if and when it comes to power. But I am concerned more about the dilemma that we are going to be facing in the near future. And that is the fact that we have supported the government of national unity for long. We have trained the Afghan National Army and the Afghan National Police. We've trained their cadets in our academies. We've equipped them with a certain amount of equipment. Now, to being negotiating and speaking to the Taliban is fine, but negotiating when there's a battle going on in the streets is going to cause a major moral dilemma for us. We will have to keep this aspect in mind while we are going to be.
So once again, so General Hasnain, you believe that maybe this should be on the down low right now, the dialoguing, and not really in public gaze, like a back channel that has plausible deniability.
Barkha, the real politics says that we understand that the Taliban will eventually come to power. And it's in the interest of India, I think, to follow a transparent route of negotiating or speaking to the Taliban.
Okay,
Barkha, let me please just 1 second.
Okay,
Barkha, permit me to make a point.
Please.
Where is the contradiction? How is it contradictory? The Americans are still equipping the Afghan National Army. They are going to give $3 billion. And they have entered into a deal. While they were fighting the Taliban, they entered into a deal. So where is this question of moral ambiguity? Am I saying don't support the Afghan National Army? Do it by all means.
Absolutely.
That is
the
the way
gray zone. This
But
is where the
sir-
gray zone will
but-
emerge.
but-
No,
no,
the
no, let-
grey
let's-
zone,
let's flesh this
that is
out.
the grey zone that strategic thinking bridges.
No, it's
We
not
can't
the
have
grey.
moral
One
here,
minute.
morality here
Ambassador
at play.
Katju, no, let's visualize this, right? Let's visualize that the Afghan troops, funded, trained, partly funded, partly, quite actively trained by India, set out to fight the Taliban, and then
Yes.
there are parallel public images of India also talking to the Taliban. This is not grey; it's pretty black and white. There is a paradox.
No, how is it? Have the Americans
is a
not bridged
paradox.
the paradox? Have the Russians not bridged this
And
paradox?
are the Americans not accused completely of a failed Afghanistan war and a failed Afghanistan policy? There's no question that the Americans have
We were
flunked
not.
a
No, no,
20-year
but how
war.
is it? Listen, the Americans, I've said time and again, the Americans suffered a strategic defeat in Afghanistan. But
Yes.
that didn't prevent them, and that still has not prevented them from from talking to both sides. That is what diplomacy is all about.
Okay,
There is no
Shalini
question
hasn't
of
spoken for a while.
embarrassment here.
Okay, all right, Shalini, let's start taking last comments. We'll start with you.
No, I think just, it's more engaging with the Taliban and not doing it overtly or covertly is a different matter altogether. But engaging them as a significant stakeholder, whether even if hypothetically you have the Afghan government taking lead, but still you will have the Taliban as a stakeholder. So it's about assessing the situation and having a proactive policy by India as a big power. I think that is what India is trying to do and trying to figure out that how we need to now go ahead with this whole situation and not allow Afghanistan, to be used by the counter actors like Pakistan and China against us. So that having a proactive policy and thinking on those lines is something I think I support that factor.
Okay, Happymon, what does this do to the safe havens debate that has often taken place between the world and Pakistan, between India and Pakistan? And that's where this whole good Taliban, bad Taliban context actually came, that there are no good terrorists and bad terrorists. Today we are basically saying that groups that we recognize to be terrorists now have led to this. This can happen. It has happened with the Hamas in Palestine, but that was through an electoral process, right? So it's a bit different. Here you actually have the Taliban shooting, surrendering Afghan troops on the streets. It's somewhat different.
Well, as I said earlier, you're talking about not a monolith. There are several groups within groups and within groups in Taliban, as far as Taliban is concerned. So just because 20 Afghan soldiers were slaughtered by the Taliban, I don't think we should shun the policy of reaching out to Taliban or talking to the Taliban. For me, it is not even about whether or not we reach out to the Taliban and talk to the Taliban. For me, when are we beginning to have open talks with the Taliban? When are we going to have open, unembarrassed talks with the Taliban? I think that is the most important part. I just want to also add, when I said if you talk to the Taliban, you also have to then apply the same yardstick to others. I don't mean talking to the Lashkar-e-Taiba, of course. I'm talking about talking to the dissident political leaders in Jammu and Kashmir. I mean, the recent talks that the government of India had with the Kashmiri political leaders, it was only the mainstream politicians. Why not the dissidents? The government of India in the past has engaged the dissidents. In fact, the government of India in the past has engaged the Hizbul Mujahideen. So it is not as if there is no history of India engaging insurgents. So I think there is absolutely no reason why statecraft and realism should stop us from reaching out to some of these people. Even if you don't want to talk about the moral implications of that, realism requires reaching out to various people who we don't like.
Okay. General Hasnain, before I give Ambassador Katju the last word, there will be a lot of this kind of rhetoric now that if you can talk to the Taliban, why not do PBC? Whether it's within the Indian context, whether it's across the border with Islamabad and so on. But I'm still stuck to my question that, does it alter how we frame the debate around terrorism going forward? To me, that is going to be the challenge, right? I know Ambassador Katju is disagreeing with me. I know that we have spoken in the past to the Hizbul Mujahideen, but even with that, even there, we broke the Hizbul Mujahideen. We created another faction. It was years of back channeling, and then we got them to the dialogue table. I do not remember a time where we have simply gone publicly dialoguing with a group that we have described as a terror group for decades.
See, Barkha, these are very different. They're not really parallels. Discussing something with Taliban and then applying the same logic and rationale to Jammu and Kashmir. But obviously, the argument will be made, and we need to be always ready to be able to counter that. I think abjuring violence, as with you, what you very correctly said, the whole issue is about terrorism. Abjuring violence is the key to the whole thing. This is the problem with Pakistan. Our talks with Pakistan can always take place if Pakistan gives a commitment that it will not involve itself with any acts of terrorism or violence as far as Jammu and Kashmir and rest of India is concerned. Similarly, I think with the internal groups, now that the situation is well under control, stable, etc., I think we are building up towards that situation. We are, it seems, although suddenly in the last couple of weeks we are seeing a few bouts of violence here and there in the valley. These are dying embers. I still feel these are dying embers. And if Pakistan doesn't have the time and the focus and attention towards Jammu and Kashmir, this is going to die out in a very short while. So therefore, I do think the conditions are going to come up in the very near future, which is what Happymon talks about, that an attempt to reach out. This was a very unexpected thing which happened on the 24th of June. The reach out to the 14 mainstream leaders. I think there are lots of surprises still waiting for us, and the government of India may be having a lot of other different things.
I agree. I agree. I think the one thing we can safely say about this government is that it doesn't play to any script that any of us can predict, and consistency is not its necessary strong suit. But Ambassador Katju, you would argue that consistency is highly overrated in your profession anyway. So go ahead with the last word.
I do believe that there are times in diplomacy when one has to be consistent. But there are times in diplomacy when one has to be realistic, even if that means the abandonment of consistency. You can say that the Taliban were nurtured by the Pakistanis and there were safe havens for the Taliban, which permitted the Taliban to retreat into safety and then come back and attack American forces. And as General Hasnain, as an eminent army person who's been corps commander, would agree with me that no army can actually defeat another force, even a force like the Taliban and an army like the American army, if their safe havens are secure, as they were in Pakistan. So one can say that. One can say that. One can say that that is why they have reached where they have. But realism demands that while you condemn that, you also accept this. Now, let me give you a parallel which you might disagree with totally. But that is the parallel of 1947. The Congress party rejected outright the two-nation theory, but accepted the product of the two-nation theory, which is Pakistan. So, does it mean accepting Pakistan as a sovereign state, did it mean that you accepted the ideology which gave rise to it? No. The 47 situation was evolved in such a manner that you had to accept, the Congress had to accept that there will be partition, that's the only way forward. Hence, I'm saying from our own history, we take lessons and be realistic and pragmatic. And I've been saying that since early 2017. But I'm sure there is great wisdom in the government. There are people who understand things, and in our strategic community, and for good reason. I mean, I'm not privy to information. I've had nothing to do with officialdom. But at least as someone with some experience of the region, it was becoming more and more transparent to me that such a day as is today will come. And it has come, regrettably.
Yes, and I think your words were prescient, because I certainly did not imagine a time when we would be, when the Taliban would be so sort of, mainstreamed in the way that today we are all saying that there is no option but to engage with them. And, that just goes to show that you're not able to necessarily predict what lies ahead. Afghanistan is a battlefield where many countries have tried to steer the course of events, and each foreign country has failed one by one. We leave it there. General Hasnain, Ambassador Katju, Happymon Jacob, and Dr. Shalini. So thank you so much, and to our audience, we'll see you tomorrow. This is going to be a big story over the next month or so, and we'll have you back, and we hope to be reporting from the ground as well when we can. So thank you so much. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.
Thank you.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.